Hello. Just going to give it a couple of minutes while people join us. Hopefully, we're not too far off looking at the clock now. I think we're pretty good. You had a good day. It's been nice. We had some good weather here today. It's been lovely. It's been nice to just not have constantly grey skies. We're joking this week. We've always done church holiday in August. The last few years, we've had some of the worst storms and weather in August. So when we finally get out of this lockdown and back to some sort of normality, we might think about putting it some other time of year. Anyway, it's one of the virtual church holiday. It doesn't rain on the internet. How are we doing time-wise? I'll give it a minute. Bless the Lord. Bless the Lord. God is good. Let me just have a look at that. Yeah, there we go. Just in the last few seconds. This again, a thank you to everybody that's interacted with us online. Folks that have been sharing this, folks that have commented and expressed their own delight at their relationship to God. It's been a real blessing to read those comments. I did actually say on the first day, particularly in relation to one of the Psalms that we studied, how when I was just going through my notes in the last few days beforehand, somebody actually commented the very thing I was studying, and that was just such a blessing. And so that's great. Obviously, if you want to connect with us, we'd love you to do that. You can do that at the facebook.com/Street Harvest. Some of those details you can find on this YouTube channel. Or not. If you belong to Jesus, we are united in the Spirit of God. We are delighted that you're taking part in this, that you're engaging with this. But the Lord bless you where you are, where He's got you planted, with the things that He's calling you to do in your life. I love the diversity of the people of God. One people, united by one Spirit, subject to the command and the purpose of one head, that is Christ. And so the Lord bless you where you are. And we're at 8 o'clock, so let's make a start. Tonight is session 3. It's an odd night, always Wednesday night. It's that moment in church holiday which you sort of feel like you've still got plenty of it left, but you're kind of getting into the swing of things and the rhythm of things. So I put on my big shaggy camping jumper, even though I'm sat into my favorite comfy chair at home. And in some ways tonight, we're going to start to build on the things that we have already looked at. We've kind of laid down some groundwork, and we're going to have a look. Last night, we thought about the welcome of Jesus Christ. We thought about the way in which the Father commands His servants to break through every barrier, to push out the message of the invitation that come, all things are ready, to absolutely everybody. No division that exists in the world should stop us from finding those who dwell behind it. Nobody is carrying out a way of life or living in such a way that with compassion and great joy, we can't present to them the same invitation that comes from the master of this house. He says, come, all things are ready, without fear, without favor. There is room in the house for all. And so now we've established the capacity of the house, and we've established the welcome of it. And in our first session, we understood that it was a personal place, a space prepared specifically for each one. It's not just some great holding pen for the sheepfold of God, but rather each one has their own place, their own welcome, something prepared uniquely for them, a staying place where God would dwell. Well, tonight we're going to go back to the same place we started, those words of David when he speaks of that one desire. And we're going to think a little deeper about some of the imagery that he uses. Psalm 27, 4-6. One thing I've desired of the Lord, that will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle, he shall hide me. He shall set me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me. Therefore I will offer sacrifices of joy in the tabernacle. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord. Do you remember the way in which David came to set his heart on providing a house for the ark of the Lord? The way in which he saw his own situation blessed by God with a palace built of cedar, actually a palace within a citadel. And so very much a housed king, a king with a place of just comfort and security and safety. And then he compares it. Remember how he seems perfectly well aware of the flimsy, the temporary, the inadequate nature of tent curtains, as he describes it. 1 Chronicles 17:1. This is what he says. See, now I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of the covenant of the Lord is under tent curtains. He is distressed to think that the symbol of the presence of God, the place where the mercy seat is, should be in a tent while he enjoys the privilege of a permanent house. Do you remember how his expression of the spiritual purpose, which he articulates when he speaks of that one desire to dwell in the house? It relates not to something that he's seen in the physical, but something that he has been given the plans for. He understands by the Spirit of God the extraordinary physical monument of the temple that Solomon will one day build. He's made preparation for every aspect of it. He's planned the construction, he's provided the materials, he's planned the service of the priests and the process by which they will be appointed and anointed and set apart and consecrated, every aspect of the service of the temple. He's had that revelation by God. He's put it all in place. And so we were excited because it means that when he speaks of the courts of the house of the Lord, and when he speaks of how it is structured, and when he speaks of the way in which there's progression in our experience of entering in and then becoming a part of the household as we choose to dwell in the house and receive the freedom that comes from Jesus the Son. All of that is great. But as I read the psalm tonight, remembering all of that, doesn't it seem strange to you that when David writes about the security and the protection offered to those who dwell in the house, remember that is the home of the Lord, he uses the imagery of a tent on a rock? Let's break it down a bit. In verse 5, David writes this: "For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle, he shall hide me. He shall set me high upon a rock." So the picture is of David's security coming because God has brought him into his pavilion, his tabernacle, and it's a tent on a rock. There are 4 key words that we're going to have a look at to begin with. And hopefully they're going to give us some insight into the spiritual place about which David is writing, because this is still really a spiritual vision. The first word we're going to look at is the word hide. That word's translated from tsafan, which doesn't mean to hide as in to bury in the garden, leave it there, or to sneak under the sofa because you've got visitors coming. It means to treasure. To treasure or to store up. It means to put safe. It's a hiding for the sake of protection and preservation and keeping for some future special occasion. It's a really powerful image of the value which God places on those who made his house their dwelling place. You know, there are some things that we have out and about, and they're ornaments and objects that have significance, things that remind us of places we've been. Some of them are just out because they're good conversation points, and to be blunt, I'm not very good at small talk, so having objects around the house that are curious is quite helpful. But there are other things, and they are precious, and they are kept away. They're kept in boxes, and they're kept on shelves where they're protected, and where maybe only a few people ever get to see them. Well, this is speaking about God taking David and keeping him as his treasure, as the thing which he values, the thing which he delights in, as the thing which he loves and wishes to protect and preserve, to keep for himself. You know, it would be extraordinary enough if David described God as guarding him the role of protective monarch. I believe that God is the king who goes to battle for his people, that he is victorious on our behalf, that we are more than conquerors because the battle belongs to the Lord. And actually, even Jesus in his humanity is given the victory by the Father. That would be extraordinary if he did it as one who was an honorable warrior, who determined in his righteousness to protect those who were weaker than himself, to deal with the oppressors and break down the strongholds, because it was in his character to do so. Well, that would be equally wonderful. But God hides David from his enemies and from the trouble of the day, because David is God's treasure. He loves him. He set his heart upon him. He wishes to preserve him and to keep him. He doesn't want him to get harmed or marked in any way, shape, or form. And God doesn't just stash us in a safety deposit box. Sometimes when you think about preserving something, there's a great tragedy it doesn't get used. In amongst the kind of classic car scene and the custom car scene, there are cars out there which are really spectacularly beautiful, but we call them trailer queens because they never ever get used. They literally get kept in pristine, temperature controlled, dust-free storage. The engine gets turned over occasionally. They get polished regularly. They get all their servicing. They get trailered in covered trailers to shows where they gleam and they look spectacular, but they never turn a wheel in anger. And over time, it's just the most tragic thing. There was a fad a few years ago of buying Ducati superbikes and just putting them on the wall, because the Panigale is such a beautiful piece of engineering. And to me, that's tragic. God doesn't preserve us by isolating us, putting us on a shelf and not using us. He treasures us to himself. And then David goes on, he says that he hides me in his pavilion. You see, you could put stuff in a safety deposit box somewhere that is secure and never see it, never touch it, never go there. And you could do that. This last week, one of my cousins spoke about discovering something hidden in a building that they were renovating. I won't tell you what it is. Needless to say, the police now have it. But it had been there. They'd had the building for several years, and they just never found it. And they did some work, and this thing was hidden. But whoever hid it also no longer had it. They'd lost possession. They'd lost relationship. It was there. When David says that God hides him in his pavilion, it becomes personal. See, the word we have as pavilion, sock, it's just odd that God hides us in his sock, but language is funny like that, isn't it? The word that we have translated it's pronounced sock, but it's literally the lair of a wild beast. It's a word that would be used as a thicket in which a predator might be hiding an ambush, or it comes from the verb sakok, to cover or to shut in or to stop any approach, to keep away. So this is a barrier which restricts access. It's metaphorically used for a pavilion because the idea is that a king or a mighty warrior going to battle would have his pavilion. And so the wild beast would be caged in his pavilion before he went out to battle. And theologically, or at least practically in the life of Israel, it gets used occasionally for the tabernacle. It's also used generically of a house of any kind. If someone lives somewhere, you could say, oh, it's their lair. Have you ever thought really about what the tabernacle is? You see, right from the tent of meeting and then through the tabernacle and the later structures in the temple, specifically the holy place, probably more than anywhere else, it's not there to protect God from the people. We call it sanctuary, and we have this idea that God's sanctuary is about his safety, because we use the word sanctuary today like an animal sanctuary, a place where vulnerable animals are taken for their safety, their protection, and their care. But sanctuary, in this case, it's not about protecting God. Why would God need protection from the people? The tabernacle is the lair of God. God, unapproachable in his majesty, in his glory, unassailable in his righteousness. God that no one can see and live is able to dwell amongst his people because he dwells within the confines of the tent. His glory is for their sakes constrained. Even when God was still meeting with Moses and the elders of Israel on Mount Sinai, before ever there was the tent of meeting or the tabernacle or the temple, the command was given that people who had not been invited to go up the mountain and to meet with him should not break through the barricade, the guard that was set around the foot of Sinai. If they were to approach God when they had not been invited, if they were to approach God when they were not ceremonially clean, then he might break out from his mountaintop lair in anger against them. That's Exodus 19:24. So when David writes of how his holy and unapproachable God treasures him and keeps him within his own lair, what he's declaring is that the sanctuary of God has become his sanctuary. He's protected from the interference or the disruption of the trouble in the world around him because his enemies simply cannot approach. They can't approach God in his lair any more than you would think it was wise to go and try and poke a tiger in a box. And the detail of this image doesn't end there, because the third word that we're going to look at is the one that's translated as secret place. Remember, this is what he writes. He shall hide me in his pavilion in the secret place of his tabernacle. This word secret place, it can be translated as a covering. Seter means a covering or shelter. But literally it translates as somewhere that something can be concealed or kept. You know what I love about this image is the way in which it speaks about the attention that God gives to each of the people that dwell in his house. The care of God towards the treasures that he is keeping within his sanctuary. You know, our little lad, he likes to scatter stuff around the house. We have two spaces, really. There's a space in the bedroom, and then there's a corner of the music room, which is his playroom, really. In fact, saying a corner, the only corner of the music room is now the corner that has my piano in it. The rest of it is playroom. But he likes every now and then toys or one of his books, and just to go through the house and just leave it somewhere else. Just put it somewhere so that space now has got a part of him in it. So he can go there. And he does that. And sometimes he does it and he completely forgets. And then weeks later, he's really surprised because you go into the room and he spots it again. Oh, that's mine. And then he takes it away. And so although these are things that belong to him and they're things that he wants to put in the spaces where he spends his days, they're not that precious. But when he was very, very little, one of the things that used to help him sleep was an old pocket fob watch. Not a very posh one. It wasn't worth anything. But the tick of that and the process of me winding it, and he used to just put it next to his ear and listen, and it would calm him down, and it was great at night. I used to wind it and hang it above his cot, and you just hear it, and it's just the tick, 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 tick. Well, as he got bigger, he was able to hold it for himself, and we took it off the chains and stuff, so it was pretty safe, and he could use it, and he learned how to wind it, and then about 4 months ago, he picked it up one day from where it was on the shelves in my office. He smiled at me, a slightly cheeky grin, and off he went. And so I followed behind him, and he went up to where his little bed is. And it's called a bay. I don't know what they call it, a bay, but there we are. His little bay. And up around his pillow, he's got all his soft toys. And every now and then he'll take a toy and he'll try and take it to bed with him because that's the toy of that day. And so I assumed that was where he was going. He was going to take that little pocket watch and put it there. To this day, 4 months later, I still cannot find, not just me, Liz as well, who looks very much more thoroughly than I do. We can't find that pocket watch. Every now and then, I see him with it. But we'll be playing and he'll run across the room and all of a sudden he'll say, and he's got it stashed somewhere. And it's somewhere that only he can reach. And that's not hard because I'm quite large and his bay is in a corner, so he can get down the back of it and I can't. But somewhere he's put that because it's so precious to him. It's so special to him. So he has it where it's near to him, but it's not on display. It's not somewhere I might say, well, actually, that belongs on the shelf. He's taken it and he's hidden it. He knows, and nobody else. There are other things that he loves. They have their own little spaces, but that one thing, it has its own place. You know, each one of us in God's house, each one of us that has been welcomed into the family, that place that Jesus has prepared for us, it's perfectly prepared that we might enjoy a relationship of fullness with a God in whose lair we dwell. It's not just that he puts us in his sanctuary, and well, as long as they're in here, the enemy can't get them. No, no. There's somewhere unique for that one. They should be there. They should be in that place, because that's where it matters to me. He didn't take that little watch and put it somewhere special that was away from where he slept, because he associates it with his sleeping. And so there is a purpose for that watch, and he has made sure that it's accessible to him, protected for him, but it is where it has purpose. This idea of the secret place, of the tabernacle. You know, you can draw lots of theological pictures from the fact that one way of thinking of the secret place is the holiest place of all. And those are wonderful pictures. But as I was preparing this study, really anticipating I might think about that, this idea that in God's dwelling place, I'm not just the next one on the shelf. I didn't arrive and he went, well, do you know what? All the chairs are the same. Pick one. Not at all. But for me, there is a place prepared for you. A place prepared that speaks of our purpose and our relationship to him and the value that he places on us. And those delightful promises where he speaks about good works before then we should walk in them. And he speaks about giving his spirit severally, that is individually, according to his purpose. They're expressed in this idea of the setter, the secret place, which is at least part of the reason why this last description of the place in which God protects David is so really very strange. All that care, all that detail, all that treasuring, all that value that he places on David. And then David uses the word tabernacle to describe where he is protected. In the secret place of God's tabernacle, the word there is ohel, and it means a tent. Specifically, not any old tent, not a big grand tent, not a warrior's pavilion. We've already looked at the lair, but now a tent of a nomad on the move, a tent that provides shelter for tonight and tomorrow is gone, a tent with no foundations, a tent that isn't in one place and you might go and find them there, a tent that is passing through. It gets used of the tabernacle because ultimately the tabernacle was just a tent, and that's one of the great miracles of it. Can you imagine you're somebody carrying the tabernacle, and then you get to the new site and you start to put it up, and while you're putting it up, you're handling the skins of the holiest place and the poles of the holiest place. Those priests, when you think of what they understood about how God manifested himself in that space, and then all of a sudden, and there comes a moment when it's completed, and all of the consecration, there's a moment where the last peg has been driven in, and suddenly it's the holiest place, and not just canvas and skins anymore. David uses a word for just a tent. Just a tent, not even a permanent tent, just a tent. In a psalm where David speaks clearly about the temple that will be established, the house that has foundations, that is strong and sturdy and remains. We have to ask ourselves, why would he persist in using for the place that is his sanctuary, the place that God is protecting him, the image of the tent? I mean, we know he wasn't very impressed with it. He didn't like the idea that God's ark was kept in a tent. So why would he then, trying to explain to us the protection of God, use that image of a flimsy, temporary tent? And why would he combine the image of something so flimsy with a declaration of the rock on which it's established? You know, we're not the only ones who don't belong here. We're not. As Christians, we are used to the idea of pilgrimage. We're used to the idea of passing through. We're used to feeling as though, well, this earth is not our home, but we have to remember God's just passing through too. I promise. Jesus himself speaks of it in John 17:14 when he says, they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Heaven and earth will pass away. He's going to reign. His truth is going to remain. His word is going to remain. God will have a dwelling place, a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. This whole creation just folded up and thrown away like an old dirty rag. God is just passing through. Until we begin to understand that's what's going on, we have this strange idea that somehow God is more invested in these things than we are. He is not of the world. That's why we are not of the world. So if Abraham didn't put down foundations, if Abraham, the first to inherit the promise by faith in the great line of Israel, if he understood that he was looking to a city whose maker and creator is God, you'd better believe that God has no intention of putting down foundations either. Because whilst the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the people and all who dwell therein, he's just passing through. This creation is temporary. His kingdom is also not of this world. That's what Jesus declares in John 18. And so, if we are to hide in the lair, the sanctuary, the pavilion, the tabernacle of God, we need to understand that the edifice itself has no strength to it. You see, you can't use pegs to attach a tent to a rock. It's got to be held in place by the one whose tent it is. I can still remember the very last time I went camping. It was the summer that I discovered that I was quite ill, and we ended up in North Devon. Long, complex story of why we ended up in North Devon and how little I liked it. And it's nothing against the dear people of North Devon. It was just the wrong time of year. The weather was terrible. And after 4 days under canvas, we had probably the worst storm we'd had all week. And my family would probably say that I'm a little over the top in what I plan for. And so our tent is a 4-season, survive anything, could go to the Arctic tent. And we've never been anywhere more exotic than the South Coast. But there we are. We have this very, very sturdy tent. And when we got up in the morning, having slept mostly through the night, as we unzipped the flap and looked out, what we saw around us was total mayhem, stuff strewn everywhere. Our tent was the only tent left standing. But there were several tents where the canvas was all there. The poles were still attached to the canvas, flapping around wildly in the wind. And you could see outlined the very damp shapes of the people that were in those tents. The only reason their tents hadn't blown away, and several tents had ended up in the trees, was because they'd stuck it out and stayed in the tent. The tent was in its position, not because its pegs were better than anybody else's pegs, not because its guy ropes were strong enough or its frame was better. It was being battered and blown to ribbons, but it hadn't moved because it had the weight of the people that were in it to keep it in place. There is no human way, no religious process to attach the tent to the rock. The tent, after all, is just canvas. It's just fabric. It's just something that was symbolic. It was something passing. It was a shadow of something heavenly. But it's held in place by the one to whom it belongs. You see, the rock is unshakable, but the tent will only be as secure as the strength of the one who holds it in place. The question is not, is this a suitable tent? But whose tent is it? No, when I think about the way in which God calls us to serve his purpose, when God asks us to do things, and often they go against human wisdom. And the human reaction is, well, does this plan look like it's going to be popular? Or does this plan look like it uses the technology well? I could have done with that for the first study this week. Or is this the sort of thing that people are going for today? But the plans of God have no power in them. They have no substance to them. They have no hold, not even on the rock, unless they are occupied by the one who has the authority to hold them in place. Even the most impressive aspects of the fabric of the tent, and if you take them away from the God who has made it his dwelling, his lair, they become utterly powerless to offer any protection. This house of God, this house in which we dwell, is only secure because of the relationship between our God and the rock. You know, I love it when Jesus speaks of God the Father, and he's talking to his disciples. He says, I'm going to my God and your God, my Father and your Father. When Jesus speaks about this house, he speaks about it and says, in my Father's house are many mansions. But when David is speaking here, he's speaking about the house, the tent, the lair, the dwelling place in which he's hidden. He says, he hides me in the secret place of his tabernacle. He's speaking about God of gods. He's speaking about the first person of the Trinity, and the Father is hiding him in the tabernacle, and he has set the tabernacle upon a rock, and it is not secure because of the fabric of the tent, but because of the relationship between the God whose tabernacle it is and Christ the rock. You know, the establishing of God's purpose in your life and mine, the keeping of God's house will never be because of the things that he asks us to construct, to display it to the world. That can be challenging sometimes. I don't know how you've felt about all the changes these last 18 months. All the things that have happened that have prevented services or gatherings or changed the way in which communities of believers have fellowshipped together. I want to tell you that there's no strength in the fabric of the tent. There's none. It may have been a blessing for a season. It may have been a provision for a season. But even the tabernacle was passing, and the tabernacle replaced the tent of meeting, which was passing. And the tent of meeting replaced the mountaintop of Sinai, which was passing. If you were to go today to Sinai, you would not find God there. If you were to go and find the remains of the tent of meeting, he would not be there. If you went to find, and countless archaeologists and historians and theologians have tried to find the tabernacle or the ark or any of those pieces of paraphernalia which were the symbols of something heavenly, God isn't there. There's no power in the tent, but the relationship between the Father and the Son is the relationship on which the church is established. The Son says to the Father, give me the lost as my inheritance. The Father says, okay. Jesus says of his disciples, he says, these were yours, Father, and you gave them to me, and not one of them has been cast aside. The relationship between the Father and the Son is the establishing of our position in him, of our security in him. And when we are in relationship with the Father, because we are standing on the rock that is Christ, because we have become his, in the freedom that the Son gives us, we are kept because of the commitment of the Father to the Son and the Son to the Father. And the Father receives us, keeps us, hears us, protects us, guards us, welcomes us, and encloses us, treasures us, and protects us in Christ. Of course, the image is also strange because there's nothing hidden about a tent that is set on a high rock. He says, he hides me in the secret place of his tabernacle. And then he goes on and he says, he has set me on a high rock. How can you be hidden when you're set on a high rock? Very long time ago, certainly longer than I care to remember, I was offered for my 16th birthday that my family would buy me an electric piano. Sounded fantastic. I was thrilled. It's absolutely thrilled. And so we went to a local music shop that was a Clavinova dealer, and we went there, and I sat at various of the pianos, and eventually I found one. It was lovely, and it was beautiful. It was exactly what I'd been thinking about in my mind. This was the instrument, definitely, except for the fact I was paying no attention to it whatsoever. Chap was asking me questions, and I'm there sort of loosely moving my hands over the keys. Because on the wall, there was an oversized FG 411 Yamaha guitar. Lots of guitar purists will say, oh, well, what's special about that? Nothing particularly, but I fell in love with it. And so there I am, sat in front of a far more expensive piano that I've been offered. I can have the piano, but I'm not paying any attention to the piano at all. I don't know what he's saying about it. I don't know what the functions are. I've sort of moved my hands over the keys, and yes, it's a very nice piano, but I am entirely focused on that guitar until eventually, I can't remember which one of my family, it was probably my dad said to me, you know, you could just have the guitar. very nearly 30 years later, I still have that guitar. And many years later, my very long-suffering wife bought me a clavinova. But the point is this: in the presence of the glory of God. Because remember, that's what happens at the tabernacle. When David is speaking about the tabernacle, Israel knows that's where the glory of God is seen. That's where the pillar of fire stood and the pillar of cloud stood when they were out living in the wilderness. That's where God manifests his glory. Before that, in the tent of meeting, that was where Moses met with him face to face, and his face shone because of the encounters. That's where people would go to inquire of God. And once everybody was in, God would come and stand over the door, and the whole nation could look and see the presence of God on the tabernacle. You see, there's nothing hidden about the tent. There's nothing hidden about the tent. The tent is up on the rock. It's not about being hidden because of your position. It's not about being hidden because you can't be seen. It's because you are meant to dwell where the glory of God sanctifies the house. You're meant to dwell where God is seen and God is heard and God moves. I don't change my phone very often. Every year they send me a contract, say, oh, we've got an upgrade. I don't upgrade. I have a very, very old little cartoon. It's a picture of some ninjas standing in a circle, all with kind of question marks, looking very confused. And then the next picture, they're all slinking off. And in the middle of it, there's a fairly ordinary looking character, but he's on fire. And the caption underneath says, ninjas might sneak up on you, but what are they going to do about it if you're on fire? It's not even that funny. But it's a beautiful illustration of what it is to dwell in the place where the glory of God is found, to dwell in the place where God makes his home. You see, when you are clothed and surrounded by his glory, when you're in the place where God is seen in his majesty and power, when you are dwelling in the house and you have access to seek the Lord in his beauty, to inquire of him in his temple, when you can get where God is, well, the enemy can't touch you when you're on fire. The enemy can't come in there because access is through Christ. I know when Paul speaks about what Jesus has done for us, he speaks about him becoming the new and the living way within the veil that is his body. And he speaks of us entering in, us following Jesus through the veil. And so those of us who were cut off, now we are welcomed into the very holiest place of all. And as we make our sanctuary God's sanctuary, he says the only way we come through the veil is by the blood of Jesus, our new and living way. That means that nothing gets in there that was not touched by the blood and subject to the authority of Christ. Nothing gets in where we dwell spiritually that is dark, that is broken, that is harmful, that is hurtful. Nothing at all is not transformed by access, because access is only through Christ. And you make his sanctuary your sanctuary. All the things which made the tabernacle, and particularly the holiest place, utterly unapproachable. The things that meant that only once a year would the high priest enter in, and then only with blood and with fear and trembling into a space already filled with incense, as he just repeatedly declared the names of God, protected and preserved. The things that made the holiest place unapproachable, untouchable, unassailable, even though it was only fabricated from canvas. Those things now make those who dwell there equally secure. David wants you to understand that it wouldn't matter if God dwelt out in the open. David would be secure there. That it wouldn't matter if the temple had no gates on it. The temple was totally open for anybody to come running. He's secure there. And why that's so crucial is because of what we studied yesterday. You see, So many people object to this idea that we can take the gospel beyond every barrier. We can take it to people who live every conceivable way of life. That is good news to every ethnos. That's the tongues and the tribes and the nations. People whose identity is different to ours, whose way of life might even be in opposition to ours. But the reality is this: our security, our certainty, our peace is the presence of God Himself. We have made His sanctuary our sanctuary. And it stands because of the promise of the Father to the Son and the obedience of the Son to the Father. Wherever we walk, remember He's on the pilgrimage with us. He is also just passing through, and He is our dwelling place. That's our study for this evening. Join us again tomorrow as we think about this house and how it rejoices in each case, each occasion, every single time that one of God's children comes home. God bless.